Hello,
that's
hello.
on. Yeah,
Yep.
we're all on.
We're all
We're on.
We're all on.
We're all on.
Good. I'm just checking the clock. It's good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Some thank yous first before introductions. The first thing, I'm really delighted that the all-party parliamentary group are behind this. It's great to see collaboration. Next thing is a thank you to Centrica. Centrica did originally have someone on the panel who's unfortunately not able to join us, but there's a colleague here who might have some questions or content later. Next thing, please tweet with glee at Zero APPG using hashtag Generation Zero. Then just in terms, the one other thing I must say is we may have a third panelist join us. And if that happens, I will introduce him at that point. Let me, though, first of all, I'll come back to me in a moment. First of all, say a huge thanks to Shevaun Haviland, who is the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, for joining us, and Jenkin, MP, Vice Chair of the Net Zero APPG. Before we kick off, let me just explain why Design Council are here, chairing this. You may not know that Design Council was actually created back in 1944 by Winston Churchill's government, coming out of the war with the intention to make sure that design was at the heart of building back industry and the economy after the war, very much at the heart of industrial and product design. And it feels, well, at that time, it was about focusing on the biggest challenge of the day. I'm delighted to say that last week, Design Council announced that we have a new mission, which is what we're calling Design for Planet. And quite simply, it is to galvanize and support the 1.69 million people in the design economy here in the UK to really make sure that planet is at the center of their thinking. Because design shapes the world, whether it's towns, cities, chairs, tables, wind turbines. It shapes the world we live in, and so design has a critical role to play if we are to meet net zero and beyond. And there's something I just want to, a point I want to make at this point. It's come up in a couple of the sessions I've sat in on. We are using the phrase design for planet very intentionally. We're all focused on net zero and carbon. Net zero and carbon, net zero and carbon. We have to also be focused on nature, because we could hit net zero, but if we don't have any bees, we're still in big trouble. So there's a really important point. When we talk about design for planet, we mean nature as well as addressing carbon. And before I sort of kick us off into talking about the subject matter today, I just want to give you one quote from the fantastic economist Kate Raworth and her book Donut Economics. I highly recommend. My colleague Kat and I met with her not long ago, and we were talking about design, and at the end she said, if you're not designing for planet, what planet are you on? Thank you, Kate. I've been using that quote ever since. Right, on with the session. The first thing, and I'm going to do first of all, is ask Shevaun and Sabrina to talk a little bit, and then we'll open up for questions. Net zero towns and cities, how are we going to achieve them by 2050, if not before? So very much towns and cities and the things that makes them work. And actually, let me pass over to you, please, to kick us off, Shevaun.
Thank you. Good morning. Is it good afternoon? Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you. So, Shevaun Haviland, British Chambers of Commerce. For those of you who don't know about the Chambers of Commerce, we represent 53 chambers from around the nation, from the tip of Scotland to the bottom of Cornwall, from Northern Ireland and across to North Essex. So we have a team in London who are about representing that collective voice into government and the media, and I think our best kept secret is we also have a network of 75 and counting international chambers of commerce as our membership. So a truly global network and a unique organisation. And the amazing thing is about our 53 chambers, is they have these incredible local roots. So they are totally embedded in their areas, in their places, in their cities. We have a membership of just under 100,000 businesses, and the majority are SMEs, but every chamber has the biggest employers as their members as well. And you know they are massively committed to this agenda. So, what are we doing in terms of net zero and supporting SMEs on that transition, and therefore driving green local prosperity? I'll give a few headlines before we get into the details. So, we've recently launched our Net Zero Hub. One thing we know about, we know from talking to our members is, look, we've just come out of a very difficult time. I'm still struggling really to recover. I'm still focused on my cash flow. Are you telling me that I now have to spend some money on becoming carbon neutral? I'm not sure I can really do that. And actually, about 10% of those we talk to have even measured their carbon footprint. So we're quite a long way off from that. So what have we done about it? We have just launched our Net Zero Hub, which is a online platform which does a lot in terms of what's out there, communicating to them what they can do, how they can measure their carbon footprint, what their peers are doing, because SMEs learn a lot through the peer-to-peer networks. And we will continue to build that out as we go. We will be at COP26 with the Glasgow Chamber, of course. We were there 4 days at Glasgow College, which really speaks to the work we're doing on skills, which I'll come back to in a sec. And that is a focus on, how we can work with our members to help them through this transition, but actually also our focus on green trade and how we can turn that into the future. So, as well as them understanding it's going to be a cost, and we have been talking to the government about how we can help move past that obstacle as a cost. It's very much about helping them think, move past cost of value. So, interestingly, although only 10% of them have measured their carbon footprint, 50% of them say they know it's really important to their customers. And that's value. It's value to your customers, it's value to your employees, but actually it's also helping them tell that story. So what's that narrative around business as a force for good in terms of climate and net zero? So it's really about investment into our local economies, our cities, to help that green transition. I'll stop there.
So Bernard.
Hi, I'm Bernard Jenkin. I'm MP for Harwich North Essex, and I am chairman of the Liaison Committee, which is the committee of committees in Parliament, which gives me quite an overview of what is going on across government. And 3 times a year we interview the Prime Minister, take evidence from the Prime Minister, cross-examine the Prime Minister, and hold him to account for the things he wants to do. And your invitation to me said it is clear that if we are to make Britain zero carbon and meet the scale of the challenge ahead, the UK government needs to work with its cities and regions to develop a long-term and coherent roadmap. Well, that is self-evident. If that's so clear, why is it not happening at the necessary pace and scale? Because it's not. And the answer is in the main message of a video I launched a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, at a climate change conference in my constituency, the 5th Hot Debate held at the University of Essex in my constituency. And you can find the video on YouTube if you just Google YouTube Bernard Jenkin Hot Debate. And please watch it, and if you like it, please tweet it. Like even the greats, like Sir David Attenborough, many are arriving late in the climate change debate. But making that video actually reflects a profound change in my emphasis and outlook as a Member of Parliament, and it's going to affect the work I do. The video does not prescribe a set of policies for cities and regions, which we can bring out in the discussion later perhaps, but it does address the question of why the government seems to be dislocated from the immediacy of the climate change and environmental challenge dislocated from the engines of change like local government, cities and regions, and indeed from the governments of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and of course quite substantially dislocated within itself. Let's take some examples, perhaps out of the climate change debate. But COVID, the official estimated probability of a pandemic at some time was always 1. So why was the government, in common with so many other governments, so blindsided by the arrival of COVID, so ill-prepared for a pandemic, which so many had predicted? There'd even been an exercise in 2016, Exercise Cygnus, which gamed the pandemic scenario. And Gus O'Donnell, the former Cabinet Secretary, lamented very honestly on The World at One 18 months ago how he wished he had advised governments to spend more on pandemic preparedness. Why did he not do so? Then why did the government respond with so much central direction, so little trust in local government? The food parcels fiasco encapsulated the over-centralisation, wanting to be seen to be doing something which was almost more disruptive than beneficial, completely ignoring what local government knew about their local communities, how they worked, and who were their natural leaders. Even every MP now knows the thousands of what we might call in the Conservative Party the Burkean platoons that make up our society at local level, and they are what got the old people and the vulnerable people their shopping and enabled them to look after themselves during the first lockdowns, not central government. More recently, we've seen our government and plenty of others blindsided by the reality of the retreat from Helmand, for example, blindsided by Putin's completely unsurprising decision to inflict gas shortages on Europe, forcing up electricity prices, and blindsided by a shortage of HGV tanker drivers, when we've all known there was a shortage of tanker drivers in the UK from long before Brexit, incidentally. What we have is a centre of government that is not good at national strategy, synthesising ends, devising ways and harnessing means like local government to achieve its policy goals. The Climate Change Committee says that responsibility for around 1/3 of the UK's emissions rests with local authorities. But communication between local authorities and Westminster is too complicated. Bayes is responsible for achieving net zero. The new, I can't remember what used to be called MHCLG and is now called LUCG or something, oversees the finance system for local authorities and the planning system. The Department for Transport helped maintain the transport networks, and the Treasury overall budgets. Other departments have responsibility for cross-cutting enablers. For example, the Office for Zero Emissions Vehicles works across government to support the transition to zero emission. And in formal stocktake in March 2020, MHCLG found that around 45 policy areas across 5 departments that are likely to impact local authorities in the net zero performance. So there is also not a culture of foresight, of challenge, of reassessment at the heart of government to see what's going right and to learn from what's going wrong. Some good things are developing. The National Security Council is a good innovation, and more recently COVID created a need for Cabinet Office Cross-Government Data Hub, which is now a permanent body, and a new SITCEN, a new situation centre, which is permanently available for handling crises like COVID or a major terrorist attack. But the overall capability for agile strategic thinking is still in its infancy. Now, part of the problem is that the civil service has become hollowed out of genuine subject knowledge, expertise and experience, because those things are less valued in a civil service culture than breadth and variety of experience and generalist skills and capabilities. A strategic centre would help the civil service become more mindful of itself and what it should be providing ministers in terms of advice. Because what is needed is a system to support ministers with much better advice and knowledge. Whoops, something's gone wrong here. Of extant people and capabilities, the means of delivering strategic plans than currently exists. If we're to build back better, the reflex of government should be confident in harnessing the local and urban and the regional leadership and knowledge that certainly exists, but is only dimly understood in much of Whitehall attitudes of habits and behaviour. To reach first base, a far more coherent strategy with cities and regions and the government must develop a different situational awareness about what is possible and what is indispensable if we're to build back better across our nation and to achieve net zero on target. Thank you very much. And I'm particularly addressing this, the video is particularly addressed at the next generation and the generations that are coming after that. I had to put it in a video because I found when I started saying, look, we need to give our grandchildren a chance to survive on this planet, it's quite difficult to say in a speech. And then I set it to a bit of music, which I chose because it was a bit of Max Richter, played by a wonderful violinist called, I'm a musician, a wonderful violinist called Murray Samuelson, who plays a very dramatic piece that reflects, it's called Paradigm Shift. What's happening to the planet is a paradigm shift, and the kind of paradigm shift we need from governments. And I hope it's a message that will land forcefully with my colleagues, because we need to accelerate what we're doing to make sure that we achieve net zero. And I'm not very confident we're going to achieve net zero on the present trajectory. Thank you.
Before I open up to questions, just a couple of things I would like to probe on first. But first, thank you for that. And there's a theme that I have seen during yesterday and this morning. Actually, the number of people that have spoken about their children have spoken, and Alok Sharma talking about his 19-year-old daughter who became vegetarian at 15, and he thought it was a fad, and it wasn't, and she's now vegan, and he's now given up meat. But him talking about that and how he recently was in Milan at a global conference of young people. There were about 400 people representing about 200 countries. And he paused and he said, they were angry. And I sat in the front row and I thought, good. And I think there is a sense that's coming, through the conference about how politicians, business leaders, this sense that we really have got to be thinking about future generations, not just our own. What I would love you each to comment on, and actually, Shevaun, if you would first, and it's something Sir Bernard said about everything in government at the moment being dislocated, and are talking about the engines of change. And I think there's a real parallel here between local government being an engine of change and business absolutely being an engine of change. So does that resonate that it's dislocated, and what needs to happen?
So maybe I'll say a few words on where we're seeing business being the engine of change, and then a few words on where we think government might help that. Our chambers are really focusing on this issue. I take East Lancashire Chamber, for example. It's running a new programme called the Low Carbon Skills Academy. They've curated 6 million in grants for green innovation. So net zero is the sort of, I see it like the sort of negative side of the coin, but actually how are we helping our local businesses innovate in this space so they can grow? They have, through those grants, they've enabled new laboratory jobs in, bacterial compounds that help fight pollution. They've doubled the production of heat pumps in the area, and they have secured a multi-million-pound contract for electric vehicles. So that is about clusters. That's about growing clusters of expertise in a place, in a region. The second, I think, is supply chain. So in the Hull and Humber, we work very closely with Drax, huge energy supplier. They've almost entirely moved away from coal to biomass, so wood chips. Not taken from trees, taken from offcuts and waste. Interestingly, the CEO of Drax at the panel I was on yesterday talked about the fact they had to turn their coal stations on for 2 weeks to get us through the energy crisis, but they hope not to do that again. So we are working with them particularly on the supply chain. So 80% of their supply chain will be local. We as the Chamber, Hull and Humber Chamber, will build that supply chain for them through the SMEs in our membership and in the locality, and that is huge for those organisations. So supply chains are really important. We do the same for EDF in both Suffolk and Somerset around their nuclear power stations. And then the third is new investment. So yesterday we had a meeting with Heathrow. They are at the forefront of moving to sustainable airline fuels. I know a lot about that now. It's absolutely fascinating. So it won't surprise you to find out you can't fly a plane on a battery or hydrogen yet. But what you can do, it is coming, but they won't be big enough to be transatlantic. Short distances. The benefit of sustainable airline fuel, as I understand it, is that you don't have to change your aeroplanes or your storage or your airports. And I'm sure we should have more than one route, right? But what they're looking at is how they will build the plants in the northeast and the northwest to provide sustainable airline fuels. So how the likes of Heathrow and airports, regional airports all over the country, will help more investment in different areas in those new technologies, new fuels. So I think that there's a lot of interesting areas there, but closer in. I mean, there's a slightly longer term. Closer in, I met one of our members in Suffolk. They're an AI business. He said, I really want to get carbon neutral. I looked at getting energy efficient servers. It's going to cost me £750,000. How am I going to pay for that? He said. On Sunday, at the small business dinner, there was a SME. He's building hospitality sites on the Welsh border. He said he's putting in heating. Looked at ground heating, much more environmentally friendly. That cost 16k. Oil heating cost 5k. He said, honestly, that's saving me £10,000. I couldn't not go with the oil. He said the opportunity cost of what I'm going to do with that 10,000 is huge for me as a business. So tricky decisions are being made. So what we need from government for our local businesses, our local green businesses, is we've got a vision. We know where we're heading. We need more help along the pathway. So, we're not always saying to the Chancellor, give out with more money, but actually, how can we incentivise SMEs along that path? How can we help them find sources of income? We met someone yesterday who'd taken a loan from the Carbon Trust. It had been massively successful for them because they changed their heating to biomass instead of oil, and they paid it back in 4 years. So, there are ways to it. If you think about business rates, if you put solar panels on your building, you increase the value of your building, and therefore you pay higher business rates. So that's a disincentive to become greener. So we just need to find more specific ways, and we've asked the Chancellor directly that in the budget and CSR this month, he will help indicate to SMEs how they can walk along that path.
Sir Bernard, would you just come back again before we open up to questions, just to expand a little bit on this? It's dislocated, the engines of change not working, and I think particularly local government. Your comments you made there.
Well, local government works within a terrific straitjacket. For example, it's very difficult. I mean, local councils are being encouraged to build more social housing and council housing, even council-owned housing. They're not encouraged to build zero carbon houses. They're not allowed to decide for their area that they only want zero carbon houses. So the house builders have got the government by the scruff of the neck, and they're going to build the houses that house builders say they want to build, not what the public actually want. Actually, zero carbon homes are harder to build. You need different skills. You need different technologies. But it is crazy. We're going to be building houses over the next decade which are going to have to be retrofitted in order to make them zero carbon homes within our lifetimes. That's going to be more expensive than if we just decided we're only going to build zero carbon homes now. So that's something that the government could just decide to do, and I hope that the new Secretary of State will look at that kind of proposal very seriously. We could give local government more freedoms to invest in alternative technologies, and unfortunately some of them have been taken for ridiculous rides and investing vast sums of money in solar schemes in order to try and sort of take investment risk, and there's, some local authorities have been very stupid. Perhaps we've just got to let local authorities be stupid in order to give them responsibility and make them accountable to their local electors more than we do. Also, I think we will build more homes if we were to. One thing the government could do is make sure that more people understand how to build beautiful communities. There is a beautiful building commission that was about building much nicer to look at houses, but that doesn't actually solve the problem. What you need to create is beautiful spaces in which people want to live, beautiful spaces in which you put these houses, where everything is walkable, where all the spaces are walkable, the buildings are permeant, the building geography of a community is permeable, which is not how modern housing estates work, where there is a mixture of social housing and owner-occupied housing and commercial premises, as you would find in an old town, rather than we'll have the rich detached houses with the garages over there, we'll have the blocks of flats for the private flat owners over there, and we'll put the social housing on the edge over there because they don't want to live next to them. Actually, if you go down to somewhere like Pinebury, designed by the Prince of Wales and his architects, they've mixed it all up together, and that's exactly how people want to live. And there aren't enough leaders in planning and development who understand this. So if I was the Secretary of State, I would say I'm going to set up a leadership academy for building new and beautiful communities. And then there might be a bit more support for house building, which local authorities might be able to persuade their populations that building more houses is actually in everybody's interests, than if they think that it's just the large house building companies coming to plonk down their chicken hutches in the usual fashion. It's got better than it used to be, but we're still a long way off. There's some thoughts about building back better.
Thank you. So, questions, and what we'll do is if there's more, we will kind of take 2 or 3 to so the gentleman with the red tie, and the gentleman at the front here, and gentleman at the back. And I think, have we got a roving mic anywhere? Thank you. We have now. So actually, no, don't worry, microphone coming your way. Of course, we're keeping them fairly succinct, and if we get all 3, thank you.
Will Hurst from the Architect's Journal. I just wanted to pick up on Bernard Jenkin's point about zero carbon homes, because isn't our real problem actually new build construction? When you look at a new build block of apartments, for example, over half of the lifetime emissions have already been emitted by the time that building is completed. So in that case, why are we not doing more with the buildings we already have? Why, for example, do we tax with VAT 20% on refurbishment, 0% on new build housing?
Thank you.
I can't answer that question. I think it's ridiculous that we're tearing down so many old buildings. We should be refurbishing old buildings much more than we do, and we should also be looking at carefully at the materials we're using, that we're not just burning a lot of carbon to pile in a lot of concrete, to bake a lot of bricks, when in fact we should be using zero carbon materials. We've got passive house development in Colchester, which is really rather remarkable. They haven't used much bricks and concrete. Good thought. I will take that one back to the Conservative Environment Network, and we will figure it out, because we're going to be working together much more on this sort of thing.
For anyone who didn't quite hear that, it's about Rishi Sunak needs to be lobbied on that point. I think this gentleman here.
Yes, good morning. Afternoon, Geoffrey Clifton Brown MP. Firstly, can I just very gently put Shevaun right on aviation? I have a company in my constituency called Net Zero that is well advanced along the way to using fuel cells to create compressed hydrogen, which was then pumped onto aircraft, which will then generate enough electricity to power the electric motors. They're on about 20 to 50 passenger aircraft at the moment. Within 5 years, there'll be 200 to 300 passenger aircraft. Okay, yes, you're quite right. They have limited range, but actually, the vast bulk of travel in Europe is within the 300 to 400 mile range, which they will be able to do. So there are some very exciting, very new developments going on in the aviation sector. And I want to go back to Bernard. I'm a chartered surveyor. 19% of all our emissions comes from our buildings sector. So why we're not immediately, I had a 10-minute rule bill to make sure that all our houses were properly insulated. That would make a major difference. And it's very easy to do and relatively cheap in new buildings. But we are going to have to tackle our old building sector as well. And that is where it is much more difficult. So I really wanted to ask the panel, given that this is one of our major obstacles to meeting net zero, our building sector, what are we going to do with our existing buildings to bring them up to the necessary standards?
Thank you.
And Bernard is dead right, but it's not actually that much more difficult to build a zero carbon house. The Scandinavians are doing it all the time. And maybe, as everybody said, we've got to get away from building bricks and concrete and rely more on modern composite materials to actually get the required insulation we need.
Thank you. And let's just take the question from the gentleman at the back, and then we'll come back to that one, Bernard. Just while we're waiting, I believe it's actually, the data I've seen is that it's closer to 40% from buildings.
Good afternoon. Yeah, hi. I'm Stephen Gleave from AECOM. I'm a designer and a master planner, and one of those people who's been trying my best over a career to make places beautiful and create the neighbourhoods that you're talking about, Sir Bernard. It's the second session today where I've heard mention of strategic planning or spatial planning, and my question is, so whose responsibility is that? You've, in your commentary, and I really found your commentary refreshing, so thank you for that. I think government is weak in terms of the civil service and the centre of advice, despite best efforts. Local government has been undermined over many years. So is there another model out there? Is this about around devolution? Is it about, Ben Hoshen this morning was talking about the importance of rural development corporations, for instance? Or might we even see some return towards regional development agency thinking in terms of spatial planning, with overriding government direction, but with local interpretation?
Thank you. And I think I think this gentleman might be a plant, given what you and I were talking about before. I think whose job is it anyway? And then actually weaving into that this piece about just insulation alone could be a real big step forward. Sir Bernard.
Just to take the first question, let's just remind ourselves what it was, because I got distracted by the second question. It was
essentially about just even insulation. Just taking one thing like insulation could make a really significant difference.
Yes, yes, of course. The problem with, first of all, listed buildings. The government is setting very high standards for EPC ratings of all buildings that are, all domestic premises that are commercially let. And it's creating an impossible hurdle. There's going to be an awful lot of empty listed buildings because it's impossible to meet that standard without breaching the listed status of those buildings. So we've got to be realistic, and we might actually think about those buildings, about how they're heated if they remain drafty, not how insulated they are, because if they're heated in a way which is zero carbon, that might be just something that we have to accept, that they're high heat loss buildings. Secondly, it's perfectly possible to convert a great number of older buildings. My brother is just retired as a vicar from the Church of England, and he's bought his first house with his wife, and it's a 1930s property, and they have converted it to a very low energy building with solar panels, heat pumps, air exchange system, so that it works as a... The problem is what we can't do, and there's a lot of concern about this, we can't just attach heat pumps to a lot of old central heating systems, because heat pumps do not heat the water sufficiently, that what we're used to with oil-fired or gas-fired central heating, and we'll finish up with a lot of underheated homes. And we've got to be rather careful about what we're persuading people to do or legislating them to do. The biggest problem about insulation, we had a warm homes initiative, which a lot of fly-by-night companies extracted a lot of grants from government, and it became a racket, frankly. And it didn't finish up insulating a great number of homes as the previous government thought it would in the Labour government. It's a very difficult thing to insulate, and create the right incentives to insulate older properties. I think we need to. So I think that needs a lot of creativity. I don't have an answer, but it's not as easy as it looks. Coming back to this question of what needs to be done, more regionalism, more powers for local government. What we need is a culture change in the way we create new communities and build them. And the culture change very much revolves around leadership, the quality of leadership, the skills of that leadership, and the longevity and permanence of that leadership. And structural change to local government, or transferring different powers between local government and national government, is not going to create the cultural change. That's why I talk about a leadership academy for building beautiful communities, because actually that's the way you need to define what the values and the culture, attitudes and behaviours of leaders of big housing developments is going to be. You need to re-educate people about how they can lead. And actually, I'd say that the single most important ingredient to building a viable, beautiful local community is in the lesson of Poundbury, led by the Prince of Wales, is instead of saying we're going to build a new community here with 20,000 new homes over the next 30 years, and Bovis is going to do that bit, and Wimpy will do that bit, and that is absolutely hopeless, because they have no long-term stewardship. They do not intend any long-term stewardship of the development, of the evolution of that community. What the Prince of Wales demonstrated is you've got to have an ownership structure of the entire plan, which we did with the new towns in the 1960s and 70s, where there is a grand design, there is a concept which is followed through over a period of decades by a single vision, led by a single leadership with the vision and the right values. And we made many mistakes with the new towns in the 1960s and 70s, but we learnt a great deal, and we can learn a great deal. But having the landowner take possession of all the development and be there looking after the development as people move in and live there and develop their own community, that's a very important component. It's a completely different concept of housing development, which has been so scorned by people who oppose the Prince of Wales for other reasons. But it is the future, and there are now beginning to be other property developers who are beginning to look at developments in that way. And those people who own large bits of land that might become developed, they've got to be educated too. Rather than just selling off the options to the house builders, they've got to be told, actually, as a landowner, you're going to make a great deal of money out of this possibly, but you've also got a massive responsibility to ensure that the land you're handing over is actually going to be creating a beautiful community where people will actually want to live.
Right. We're going to move on now. So an absolutely key part of placemaking, as well as community, is the economic aspect of any community, the jobs and the skills. And so we're going to now talk about how we build net zero jobs and skills. We can go wider, but I would love you to also just specifically link it into, we're in the youth zone, how we can build this transition and the new jobs to really particularly support young people. And I think there's something I've noticed about everyone talking about green jobs, green jobs. There's this just sort of wonderful, great big fluffy cloud of green jobs. And so also starting to try to make that tangible and draw that down and make it real. What are they exactly, and how are we going to get people into them? Would you like to kick us off, Shevaun?
Yes, thank you. I would, because we have a great example of how we're really doing that. So last year, the government Department for Education put out a tender to the UK for local skills improvement plans. So we have for some time been saying we are not teaching our young people the right things to get them into work. We need to look at it from the other end of the telescope. So let's spend some time talking to local businesses, to SMEs, and asking them what sort of skills they need, and let's teach that in our local schools and FE colleges. So I'll give you an example. One of our Suffolk members, Agritech business, have built an amazing new machine that effectively it's a combine harvester, but I think that's probably not what they call it now. It's a computer that harvests. Built these amazing new things, 12 of them on order. No one in the locality knew how to operate them. So they're now working with their local FE college to help young people come through with the skills that means they straight into those jobs. So local skills improvement plans, there are 8 pilots now running across the UK, all being convened by the local chambers, which is excellent. All the chambers have their local colleges as members too. So, you know, that's a really exciting start in the right direction. It's challenging because SMEs actually aren't great at recognising what skills they need. And of course, none of us are great at recognising what the skills of tomorrow are. But we know we have to do that for our young people. So local skills improvement plans are a really great thing. New types of apprenticeships for green jobs, green apprenticeships would be something that we'd like to see more of. And actually, in areas where we've got skills shortages, how can we point our young people at STEM subjects much earlier on in the pipeline so they've got the right skills when they come out the other end? You know, yesterday at our panel, we had a gentleman put up his hand and said, I run a big engineering company, we put boilers in. How can I retrain my entire workforce to put in new green boilers? I mean, it's a massive challenge, so we really need a skill system that's much more flexible, that can change, that can pivot as these things come down the pipe. I was with South Essex College last week, and the principal is saying, we want to teach plumbing, heating engineering, HGV drivers. She said, I could fill a class to teach plumbing tomorrow. I cannot find somebody to teach that class at a salary of 40k. I can't find a plumber who will teach that class because obviously they earn more plumbing, which is just shocking. So that's actually another broken part of the skill system. So we really, you know, we are absolutely behind getting our young people. We know they want these jobs. Ground Control is an amazing organisation in Essex, huge business, facilities management, but parks and biodiversity and, you know, keeping our green spaces looking beautiful. Even they, with that purpose, that green central purpose to what they do, are really struggling to recruit, you know, in their areas. So it's a big challenge, but one we have to do for our young people.
Thank you. Just before I hand over to you, Bernard, we have a colleague from Centrica in the audience. And can we pass the mic to you to just comment a little bit on what Centrica are doing? I know you have a very strong apprenticeship scheme, for example.
No, thanks very much, Minnie. So I'm Alexa from Centrica. Apologies that my colleague James couldn't be here today. Unfortunately, logistical issues held him back. So apologies for that, because he was really keen to obviously contribute to the discussion around the investment that we're making in apprenticeships, and we're currently looking to recruit 3,500 smart energy apprentices between now and the end of the decade. And clearly the biggest challenge for us will be decarbonising people's homes, and as kind of Bernard said earlier on in the discussion, there are the kind of big kind of challenges in that, because it's going to be much more disruptive and potentially more expensive, some of the solutions and technologies that will be going into people's homes than people probably expect. So again, probably a question maybe for the panel is, how do we bring more meaning and life to these choices? They're clearly choices for business and they're clearly choices for government, but if we're going to make that change, it kind of needs to be driven by individuals and communities. And so how do we, and possibly COP26 is a great opportunity to bring life to this, how do we really affect that change?
Thank you. And so Bernard, can I pass that question over to you, as well as you just diving in onto the skills piece? You weave it in to your thoughts around skills and jobs.
Well, I'd come back to the national strategic role that central government has, which isn't necessarily about taking everything over and doing it itself, but it is about recognising, ultimately, if things are not happening as we want them to happen, then somebody's going to be accountable, and it's going to be the minister. I'm going to hang my answer about skills on the road fuels crisis, because it demonstrates exactly what happens and gives us some very good lessons about what happens when government doesn't accept that problems will become the government's problem. I mean, we know that we've discovered for the second time in 20 years that we have a very fragile road fuel delivery system that is very easily knocked off balance. And lesson number one is we need a more resilient road fuels distribution and storage system. It's in the concept of operation, not the physical infrastructure. Secondly, lesson number two, when you've got a crisis, the public are not going to be flannelled by ministers peddling assurances. The COVID comms lesson is the public will engage with hard data. They will engage with people who have real expertise, who are not party political, and they will trust credible information and credible messaging being given to them in a crisis. We saw none of that in this crisis. So that's lesson. But lesson number three, and this is the crunch, if there is a known problem in industry or commerce, like a shortage of HGV drivers, and this was ex-logistics manager from Tesco wrote to the paper recently saying that there were a number of factors that contributed to this shortage, notably the huge influx of cheap foreign drivers that drove down wages and discouraged our own indigenous workforce from becoming trained as HGV drivers. Someone has to be accountable for addressing that. Now, obviously, it's for industry. The government's completely right to say it's for industry to sort out their own workforce planning problems. But if industry's not sorting out, whose responsibility, who's accountable for when it all goes, if I may use the phrase, tits up, if I'm allowed to say that anymore? Because sooner or later, it lands on the failure lands on the government anyway. Ministers should be holding industry accountable for addressing the skills shortage, convening meetings and saying, what are we going to do about this? What do you need us to do to help you deal with this problem? Because, I mean, even if it was a Brexit problem, Brexit's 4 years ago. We knew Brexit was happening 4 years ago, and we still didn't address the problem. The idea that government just passes the buck back to industry and says, they've got to sort it out, it's not our problem, well, that approach has obviously failed. So it's about sharing responsibility. And fourth, and this is a crunch point, in the Cabinet Office, there should be a much stronger centre, which is supporting perhaps the National Security Council, constantly scanning the horizon for potential problems or actual problems that might lead to real problems, alerting departments to ensure that if Bays don't think it's their problem and Transport don't think it's their problem, that the two departments are actually working together to resolve that problem, such as a shortage of HGV drivers. And this, of course, involves gathering information from external experts and academics and industry sources and synthesizing that knowledge, advising the Prime Minister, giving advice to the Cabinet Secretary, so that the relevant Cabinet Committee is properly informed about what the situation is and action is allocated to government departments in order to resolve that problem. This just doesn't happen. It's not happening, and it's not happening on green jobs, green skills. It's happening to a degree, but somebody said it's not more difficult to build green homes. It is much more difficult to build green homes if you haven't got the skills base to build green homes, and we don't have it. That you require completely different skills than building conventional Bovis homes. Sorry, I keep having a go at Bovis. And it also means changing the culture in Whitehall so that thinking off the wall, challenging accepted truths, and giving uncomfortable truths to ministers becomes a normal part of government. Because I don't think you can expect ministers to have 360-degree vision about every subject and then blame them for everything that goes wrong. I think the system is letting them down. And the ministers have got to want to have much more challenge and information, or they'll just carry on shooting the messages. So we do need to change the culture of politics a bit too. But I think we've got a huge challenge. We are not going to achieve net zero with the system we've got at the moment. The government's just announced another target. What was it? It was yesterday, Boris just announced another target for some 2030 target. Oh, we're going to have entire electric vehicles by 2035 or something. They haven't got a clue how they're going to achieve that. The energy white paper doesn't even explain how much electricity we need to generate to charge all the vehicles. We haven't got the national grid structure in place to distribute the electricity. We've still got a grid, sorry, Centrica, this is right on your street, isn't it? You don't own the national grid anymore, I can't remember. But the point is, you've got a resource asset-based model regulated by Ofcom, which decides what investment you're allowed to make in these national energy networks. And in the case of the national grid, it means you finish up with relatively short-term planning when we need a 50-year vision of what we want from our electricity grid that recognises that vast quantities of electricity are going to be generated offshore, and we've got no plan for how to get that stuff into our homes and into our factories. We need an offshore grid, but there's no method of using the existing regulatory structure to deliver an offshore grid. So we're going to have more pylons instead on a patch and mend basis. And I can tell you, in a rural constituency with an AONB, that's not what the public are going to accept. So we've got so many shortcomings in our system that need to be addressed rapidly. I would just say this finally. We've got to mobilise our population to accept some very much more radical policies. And if we explain it to them, what needs to be done, we will be able to apply those policies. People have just accepted that we're going to put up taxes to deal with the COVID backlog. People accept paying taxes or doing whatever is necessary if they have confidence that the government is actually going to deliver on what it says. I don't think much of the public has got much confidence that government, as a generic term, is going to be able to deliver net zero. So of course they're going to object to extra costs, which they think are going to be pointless, resulting in plans and targets for which there is no implementation plan. I'll just end with this. The integrated review, defence, foreign policy, and all the rest of that. Brilliant document for 120 pages. There's 2 pages on implementation. This is a cultural problem in government, that we don't fuse implementation, how we're going to make something happen, with the idea that it should happen. And that needs to be a much more coherent centre of government that coordinates that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's something I just have to pick up on there, which for any of you who know Jim Collins, the brilliant business writer, there's a fantastic phrase that he uses, which is any organisation needs to practice productive paranoia. And productive paranoia being, just a good sense of long-term and peripheral vision about what might be coming. So I love the idea, Sir Bernard, of government creating the productive paranoia department or team to be thinking about these longer-term things. Any questions bringing us just back to the skills and jobs for net zero? Or any questions about anything that you've heard? There's one here with the lady here, and then the gentleman with the black jacket. Anyone else when we've got the microphone? Well, if we collect both of those questions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sarah Richardson. I was interested in your Net Zero Hub and what you're doing to advise businesses on how they can respond to this agenda. And as businesses look to grow and they're looking for institutional investment, increasingly they're under pressure to perform to ESG standards. There's quite a lot of flexibility on what different investors look for in ESG, different people who are trying to advise, or different standards which people are looking for. So I'm just wondering how you were advising businesses to respond to that agenda, and how that was forming part of your net zero agenda.
So, Digital Policy Alliance how could digital technology in the energy sector coordinate and support work towards energy efficiency gains and emissions reductions? And how can SME participation be encouraged?
I think to some extent both of those, and sort of start where you want.
I might have to. Sorry, could I have your question again? Could you say it again?
Digital technology in the energy sector, how could it support coordinating energy efficiency gains, and how can SME contributions be encouraged? So two questions really in that.
I'm sure Centrica will have a good view on that, digital as well, digital in energy. I'll say a word on ESG and standards. You're absolutely right. It's so confusing in terms of what you measure, how, by who, and how you can then communicate that you have followed the Carbon Trust or the BSI, ISO numbers, and so on and so forth. And what we're trying to do through the Net Zero Hub is explain what is on offer, what the options are, do that communication so members can pick what's right for them. Sorry. On a wider level, though, I really want us to think about...
We're going to just give you a moment to have a good old drink. Bernard, would you like to dive in? And would you like to pick up on the digital, the role of digital?
Yes. Bad luck. You should be Prime Minister one day. On the environmental and social governance question, actually, there's quite a lot of business that is doing it much better than government. I don't think government's got very good environmental social governance. Why are we still building so many public buildings without solar panels on them? Why aren't we building net zero public buildings? Why have we got... how are we going to harmonise our global trade policy with a net zero policy? Because actually we've offshored quite a lot of our carbon emissions by importing instead of producing what is carbon intensive. So I think as far as... so the first thing I would say is that, and this answers the metrics question, what are we measuring? And if the government wants business to be clearer about what environmental and social governance means, why doesn't the government publish some metrics about how we're actually going to measure our success of getting towards global zero? And if we're going into this COP26, we should be setting an example. Why aren't we using the Downing Street press office and the Downing Street press room, the briefing room, for COVID-style briefings on the net zero metrics that we're going to use, the simple, clear, credible data that we're going to use to measure how well we're doing? Because that actually puts the government itself on the spot, and it will give the people an opportunity to see whether the government is actually achieving what it wants to achieve, and maybe the same metrics could be applied to business, and there will be clarity and leadership. But I just don't... the problem is net zero is still just one of the things we do in government alongside all the other things that we do in government. It's not the main effort. It's got to be the main effort. And on the digital question, I'm confused by the question and I want to reflect on it, but there must be, if we can give consumers and businesses access to real-time information about how much... Okay, when you travel on an aeroplane between London Heathrow and Greece, where you're going on holiday, why doesn't somebody give you on your ticket exactly how much carbon you have personally been responsible for putting into the atmosphere? Why don't the airlines say, would you like to buy offset with this ticket? Because I think lots of people would do that if it was much easier. I'm going to try and make my life more zero carbon, but I'm just beginning to research how you do offset. I'd like to know how the government measures the quality of offset. Apparently, I mean, we know that planting trees is by and using the natural nature to absorb carbon is by far the lowest cost of reabsorbing carbon into the environment. But how much of that is additional I mean, if I just buy a bit of woodland, am I now net zero? I don't think so. I think that woodland existed anyway. I think we need to distinguish between, the concept of additionality. What offset is actually additional carbon absorption as opposed to substitution? And if I buy some offset, how do I know that the offset is actually additional and not just greenwashing? I don't want to be greenwashing myself. So I think all these metrics will rely on digitally produced information that must be readily available and very acceptably available to consumers and to businesses so that we can measure what we're doing. I just don't know, there is no clarity about the metrics of what constitutes a successful year towards global zero. We just set targets, and I don't think the public's got any confidence at all in government setting its own targets.
Thank you. Are you up for giving it a go?
Apologies.
Don't worry.
I would actually, though, on the data question, I'd love to hear from Centrica on smart meters and how that data collection is being used, because obviously it's consumer, but it's, I mean, SMEs are the same in that respect.
Thanks very much. Well, certainly data science and big data analytics is one of the most important skill sets going forward within the energy sector. I mean, I think there are big questions around, clearly smart meters, well, the great advantage of smart meters is it allows you to, it puts you in control of your energy use, and we can have seen a corresponding decrease in consumption, and there are great opportunities there in terms of the footprint of kind of individual energy patterns and things that people have, and there are questions about how you might use, in terms of social obligations monitoring, for example, the fact that if you've got an elderly auntie in the Highlands who every morning puts the kettle on and she's up and about and is fine, and then sometimes it doesn't happen, then how do you use that data? But of course the data from smart meters actually goes to the kind of a central resource rather than back to energy companies per se. But there are questions and opportunities there, but clearly there's also privacy and challenge questions as well that need to be considered. But from a skills perspective, then it's a big focus for us. And again, as Sir Bernard mentioned, in terms of putting customers and households in control, through platforms like Hive, for example, is a great opportunity and something that we're investing in. Again, alongside that, to try to change it, to move it on, there's also questions about how we better harness existing skills in the upstream oil and gas sector and ensure that, for example, we're looking to repurpose the Rough reservoir in the southern North Sea as a hydrogen store. I mean, that would be a great opportunity. Other organisations will have different opportunities, but how do we harness that and that we don't just write off these jobs that have been around for the last few generations? I think that's something we'd be keen to hear about too.
And I'd just like to say a last word on the standards. It is something that I am really interested in this role, because our members, the SMEs of our nation, are incredible members of their communities. They are a force for good. They employ the local kids. They support local charities. They're part of their communities. They improve their built environment. But they're not telling that story. And we know that story, that commercial imperative for good, improves your bottom line, you attract better talent. But what measures can we use? What certification? So we look at things like B Corp, for example, which I think is an amazing organisation. But the initial assessment as to whether you can go into the B Corp process is 300 questions. And that's just a start. So that's too onerous for an SME, and we're talking to them about how we might build something more appropriate. But there are, then we get into SDGs. How do we use those as a framework? So, yes, there isn't a common framework, which is the challenge.
Thank you. It is my job to bring us into land on time. You had your hand on the microphone for a very quick last comment.
To reinforce that point about not trashing the skills that might be in industries we regard as unattractive, because actually the skills in those companies are going to be vital. I just had a meeting with a carbon capture and storage company this week and he used to be an oil executive and an engineer in oil and gas exploration, and he's now applying that. His company is entirely about carbon capture and storage. And in fact, the companies that we associate with carbon fuels, these are going to be the companies that are going to power the net zero thing. It's not greenwashing. We've got to help them do that. If we just disinvest from those companies, then we will lose from those skills. So I'm not in favour of just disinvesting from these companies. We've got to make sure that they're regulated properly, so they're doing the right things. If there are companies out there, we may have no investment in them, but if they're doing the wrong things because they're not regulated properly, well, that might be something to do with the government rather than the companies.
Thank you. So, just a few themes in summary. We've covered a broad area, built environment, jobs, roles, etc. There's a big theme, I think, in terms of, what's wrong, this sense of things that are being, that are dislocated, the important engines of change, local government, never forgetting how important that is, and of course business, huge engine of change. Absolutely, emphatically from Sir Bernard, it's got to be the main effort. As the chair, and I've got the microphone, I couldn't agree more. This notion of us needing some productive paranoia in government, but then moving on to the positives. These green jobs, beginning to really articulate them, beginning to have case studies, beginning to have real examples of them. And the final point there, I think, is about investment, which is Sir Bernard's point, which is we have to get government to see that you need to make investment now to save money later. It is that invest now because it will cost a lot more later. So investment, and that's across so many aspects. Huge thanks to our speakers, Shevaun and Sir Bernard. Thank you so much. Thank all of you for the questions. Last announcement from me is at 3:50 in this space, we are going to have an in-conversation with Alok Sharma and Stanley Johnson. So that's one I would come early to get a seat. Thank you very much, everyone.